Good morning, everybody. It's a great day at First Methodist. I'm glad you're all here. Happy Mother's Day to any mothers in the crowd. My name's Barry Hudson. I'm chair of the communications committee here, and my wife, who is in the back, and I grew up in the church, which means we've been around this place a little over 60 years, actually. So feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have any questions. I may or may not be able to answer them, but hopefully I can shed some light on any questions you have. Just to start out, here's a photograph of downtown Fort Worth, looking down 7th Street, what we used to call Automotive Row, and here's the church campus here. But you know, we have automotive garages here, Rockefeller Hamburgers place here, actually a grocery store and deli on the corner. Any guesses what year this is? 60? No, before that. 57. What? 57. 57 is exactly right. And the way you can tell is that the Landmark building, what we used to call the CNB building, was built in 56, 57, but it wasn't until 58 that they added the big clock. Do y'all remember the big digital clock that was on top? It was 12 foot tall, 12 foot wide, and it rotated. It had CNB on two sides, and it had a digital clock, this largest digital clock in the world. So 1957, so things have changed a little bit since then. My goal over the next 53 minutes is to cover 160 years of history of this congregation. So that's about 3 years per minute. So we're already behind, if you're. But as I said, my wife and I grew up in the church. We were active in the children's choirs. Actually knew each other in nursery and and vacation Bible school. And both of our daughters have been married here. They were active in the youth choir and the youth MYF and everything here. So and we've been doing the television ministry for the last 40 years. So come by the third floor television ministry studio at any time. Need to start out by putting this a little bit in context. Where did we start? Okay, so talking about Texas. Okay, Texas Declaration of Independence, March the 2nd, 1836, and then just 4 days later was the fall of the Alamo. Okay, so at that time we were an independent nation. Actually, we were the nation of Texas. And so the United States actually sent missionaries from the United States over to this foreign country called Texas. So missionaries came to Texas. But then almost 10 years later, a little over 9 years later, Texas was annexed as the 28th state in the Union. And it was that same year that the Methodist Episcopal Church South was organized. So this is a key date because in 1844 is actually when the Methodist Church split to North and South. And we'll talk about, the reunification here in a few minutes, and it was over the issue of slavery, as you would expect. So it was just a few years later, it was actually, in 1849 that the fort was established here on the banks of the confluence of the West Fork and Clear Fork of the Trinity River. It's named for General William Jenkins Worth. But he never actually set foot in the fort. He died. He's the one that suggested that there should be a series of 10 forts all the way from the Eagles Pass all the way up through North Texas to protect the white settlements from the Indians, if you will. So at that time, when the fort was established, it was named after him. It was during this period of time when it was a fort that the first members of the Methodist Society started here in the area. But it was only 4 years later in 1853 that the fort was abandoned. So at that time, the residents that had assembled around the fort took over the fort and changed some of the fort buildings that are seen here. You can see the area. This is the area that's going to be Panther Island now with the Trinity River Vision, but the bluff overlooking the Trinity River and the Trinity River in the background up here. So it was during this time that the circuit riders served this area of Texas. Birdville was the original county seat for Tarrant County. and it's located up here. This is a overlaid on a map of the current highway system out there. But then in 1856, Fort Worth stole the county seat by 7 votes. And the story is that, you know, you did everything you could to get out voters. Now, it's a little bit different than the voting yesterday, because actually the way Fort Worth got more people to vote for Fort Worth is that they stole the rum barrel from Birdville. So they had 2 rum barrels to offer rum to voters if they would vote for Fort Worth. So Birdville contested it because of the stealing of the rum barrel, but had another election 4 years later. By that time, Fort Worth was much larger and easily won the second election. As I said, this is the age of the circuit rider. Circuit riders had a very, very hard life because they didn't have a permanent home. They had several different appointments. They would go to various different communities in an assigned area, but they were always on horseback. They were out in the rain, had no permanent home. But the first circuit rider that was assigned to this area was John Wesley Chalk in December of 1852. He was originally assigned to the Red Oak Mission in Springfield District, and then it was split a year or 2 later into the Alton Mission with 30 different preaching appointments. So with 30 different appointments, you know, he might come through the Fort Worth area maybe every other month, something like that. This is the best picture we have of him, but this is much later. Actually, at the time he was a circuit rider serving this area, he was only 26 years old. He had recently lost his wife, had died, and so he devoted himself to spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ by being a Methodist missionary or circuit rider. Yes, yeah. I always wonder if they, you know, changed it or, you know, as it went through. Over the next 20 years, we had 16 different appointments as circuit riders. Typically, it was only for 1 or 2 years, and then they would change districts. There was some period there during the Civil War where there were no appointments. But again, this was the Methodist Episcopal Church South. There was also Methodist Episcopal Church North as well. But they didn't directly serve this area. Occasionally a minister would come down and talk, but unfortunately it was mostly about abolition and everything. So an ME Church North preacher came to Fort Worth and was actually lynched just about a mile from here, just not far from the courthouse. So the services at that time, because there was no church building, were held in various homes. They were also in the Masonic Lodge that was there close to where the courthouse is. A separate Methodist circuit was started in 1868. At that time we had 200 Methodists, 150 white, 50 black, and so it was a mixed congregation. At that time, and then in 1870 there was a separate church denomination created, the Colored Methodist Episcopal Church. In 1870, it later became the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church and was reunited with the rest of the denomination. The first full-time minister assigned to Fort Worth was R.H.H. Burnett in 1873. He made a whopping salary of $200 per year. So at that time, the services were held at the old Tarrant County Courthouse. It was a wooden courthouse that's in the same location as the existing courthouse is there between Belknap and what's now Belknap and Weatherford Streets. Later, after he served First Methodist, he went on to help organize Centenary College in 1884. I guess you know we have a few alumni of Centenary College, most notably Tim Brewster went to Centenary College, so did Susan Brewster. They both sang in the choir there, as well as Charles Gaby. Charles Gaby went to Centenary College as well. This is an aerial rendering of Fort Worth in 1876. The first parsonage, we don't know exactly where it was. It was located somewhere on East 1st Street. And the first church building was called the 4th Street Church because it was on the corner of 4th and Jones, and it was built in 1874. Serving this first church building were these ministers. Here are a couple of photographs of them at a later date out of an annual conference report. Here's another view of the building. It was a small white frame building. It was about 40 foot by 80 foot. So that's about the size of Wesley Hall. That's down the first floor here. But it was basically a one-room church. Here's an actual photograph of the church building. This is actually taken at the annual conference that was held here in Fort Worth in 1879. By 1885, First Methodist had become, or actually Fourth Street Church, had become the largest church in the conference. And we've remained that the largest church in the conference ever since. This is a wonderful website that you can look at on the web. It has hundreds and hundreds of old historic photographs around the Fort Worth area. And a number that deal with First Methodist and the various locations that we've been at over the years. It's Fort Worth the way we were. You can access that through the Fort Worth Architecture website. I'd encourage you to look at it. So this actually labels it. Some of the information on there is not exactly right, but it's a really good introduction to a lot of the history of Fort Worth. The second church building was built on the same site at 4th and Jones. It was a brick building built in 1886, and we were in that building until 1907. This is a rendering of that church. It's a little bit distorted, but basically it was a one-story structure that had two uneven spires. It had an entrance on each corner, under the spire on each corner, and then it had a clear story area up here with stained glass windows, a rose window in the front. Now, by this time, the streetcar had actually been extended. So the streetcar actually came right in front of the church down Jones Street, then turned and went further to the east. The name was changed while we were in this church building, was changed to First Methodist. When the brick building was built, instead of tearing down the wood frame building, they actually put it on rollers, if you will, and pushed it to the back of the lot so it faced Grove Street back to the east. And so they kept the church building, the original church building, back here in the back, and continued to use that when they built the brick building. There were a number of ministers of note that served the church while we were in the red brick building. A couple of those are E.D. Muse. He later became a president of SMU, and Alonzo Monk, who is also very notable because he was a great orator, came from a big church family. His father was a minister, his brother was a minister, his son was a minister. And so during that period of time, the congregation just kept growing. As I mentioned, we changed our name to First Methodist because by this time, here's First ME, First Methodist Episcopal Church, the building we were just looking at, but we had helped start two other Methodist churches, Missouri Avenue ME South and Mulkey Memorial Methodist Episcopal Church South by that time. So instead of going by 4th Street, we went by First Methodist by this time. So a lot of other notable churches, but you can see the Methodist churches were a little bit more ornate. Part of the building is still standing at 4th and Jones. It's the back portion of the church. The vestry is back here. This is the historic monument that is on there. When the Basses redid Sundance Square, they preserved this area. For many years, the area here was part of an old warehouse that the Star-Telegram used to store papers for distribution after the printing process. Here's another page off of the Fort Worth the Way We Were website that shows actually sort of where the vestry was back here at the back. It was added a few years after the main church was built, but it's said to be the oldest brick structure in Tarrant County. Every year, the confirmation class goes over to the 4th and Jones site and they have a communion service out here to commemorate the original location of the church. As I mentioned, Alonzo Monk was a great orator. His granddaughter is actually still an active member here of the church. He born in Louisiana, grew up in Arkansas. As I mentioned, his father was a minister, his son was a minister, and is really well known throughout the Methodist history books. By 1908, the church had grown so much that it had outgrown the brick structure, so a new structure was built. This beautiful, it has two dome towers with a large Richardsonian arch on the front, Corinthian columns in the front, stained glass windows. Here's a picture of them in the 20s. But they moved over to 7th and Taylor. So they moved from the east side of town to the west side of town, but still basically downtown. And still on a streetcar line. That's what this line is. Here's the streetcar line that came down 7th Street and went out to the west. As I mentioned, the streetcar line went down Jones here as well. But it's a beautiful church. Now, some of the first street lights were put down 7th Street in this location, but when the church was built, it was still dirt streets on both sides of the church. Here's a photograph from inside the church. You can see the large pipes for the pipe organ. The organ had a very important location in the sanctuary. You see this table over here to the side, we believe is the table that we've restored for the communion table in the sanctuary now. If y'all have been around the church a little bit, you know a few years ago we split the rail. Usually it had a continuous communion rail. We split it to make it easier to get into the communion table, and this table actually was found in one of the Sunday school classrooms. Somebody had added doors to it and everything, but it has the engraving or carvings on the table, so we believe it's the same communion table that was restored there. Here's another shot on the inside of the church. There was a large dome. It's sort of hard to see the dome in this photograph, but a dome over the main part of the sanctuary. The choir actually sat at the back of the sanctuary in the balcony. And so when they had choir practice, they had large wooden doors that they would close, and they could have choir practice there in the sanctuary and open it up to see actually how it sounded. And then the pews were below. And my understanding is that below the dome there was stained glass just below the dome in there. On the third floor, as you come out of the elevator, there is one of the original pews from the 7th and Taylor Church that you can sit on while you're waiting for the elevator there. Unfortunately, this building was torn down and an office building was built, bank building and office there. So this is a view of some of the, I love the straw hats and the flapper hats. You can tell this is in the 20s, but some of the congregation outside. This is a group photograph that was taken at 7th and Taylor, and it's panoramic. Of course, everybody had to sit still as the camera rotated around in there, but just to look at sort of a close-up of the panoramic photograph, this is actually looking down 7th Street. So again, 7th Street was still, no skyscrapers over here, but you can see some of the taller buildings as you go down towards Main Street, looking back that way. As you look at the building, and you see, there's a lot of people in this photograph. Some of them are hanging out the windows. Some are, on the light poles here. It looks like they had a tent back over here in the background, sort of revival, So, and then this is rotating around. This is the right side of the photograph. There was a boarding house right across the street at that time, and this is looking down. This is Taylor Street as you're going south. There are a number of notable ministers that serves the 7th and Taylor Church. H.D. Knickerbocker was the minister at the time of the move. Again, a very rousing Methodist minister. I think that some of the Methodist ministers back then would rival some of the Baptists, as far as, the fire and brimstone kind of thing. But J.W. Bergen, we'll talk about him in a minute. I love this photograph because this tower over here in the background is the old City Hall, the clock tower on the old City Hall. During this period of time when we were at 7th and Taylor was when World War II was, and Camp Bowie was created as a military training camp out on the west side. Here's the downtown area, so we would have been located right in here. And Camp Bowie took up a whole lot of the west side of Fort Worth. Here's sort of a modern map of the areas. It would include the Botanic Gardens, goes all the way up to White Settlement Road, and covers a lot of the areas of Chamberlain, Arlington Heights, and Como as well. But First Methodist, First Baptist, and First Presbyterian all banded together back, in World War I to provide wholesome entertainment for the troops, so that they didn't spend time in the old Hell's Half Acre at the south end of downtown, which was still going strong by then, even though it wasn't the Wild West anymore. But and later, these same three churches got back together and created the Presbyterian Night Shelter much later on. The very first religious broadcast was made by J.W. Bergen as minister at First Methodist. The first religious radio broadcast in Texas is on WBAP, which is a brand new radio station. It was created by Amon G. Carter. His circulation manager came to Amon Carter saying, there's this newfangled thing that you can talk into a little microphone thing and people can hear you from miles around. And Carter said, oh no, that's never going to work. People are always going to read the paper. They want that paper to hold on to. But I'll tell you what, I'll give you $300 and you can start, what do you call it, a radio station? So they started the radio station. The first day of broadcast was May the 2nd. And the next day, on May the 3rd, was the first religious broadcast. The question I always like to ask is, who was listening? Nobody had a radio. You don't buy a radio if there's nothing to listen to. So anyway, those sound waves were floating out in space somewhere. Light Crest Doughboys were from Fort Worth and broadcast on WBAP. Also, Mrs. W.F. Barnum had a radio Bible class. She was one of the women here at the church. And of course, at that time, there was no ordination of women in the Methodist Church. And really, they were not allowed to speak from the pulpit. So every Saturday night, she did the lectionary, that we still have the lectionary, and she would go through the Bibles, the Bible class and get people ready for Sunday morning. And so people could listen to it on the radio the night before. Dr. Eugene Hawk was also a minister at this time. He was dean over at SMU at Perkins School of Theology. Here's the old Fort Worth City Hall I mentioned with the clock tower and the original downtown fire station. And you can see this dome over here in the back. That's our church with the two dome towers here. You can also see First Christian Church over here on this old postcard. But so we were just a block away from City Hall. So as the congregation grew, there was a need to have more space, and there was a concern that Fort Worth was expanding and that large buildings were encroaching into where the church was located. So land was acquired in 1928 for a new church building. It's the property where the current building is right now. In a 3-day campaign, $300,000 was raised, which was a lot of money back then. It's a lot of money now, but it's a lot more money back in the 20s. So with the acquisition of the church campus and the building of the building, this became the first $1 million campus in Fort Worth. What you did is that you bought these gold bonds. Here's a rendering of the proposed church. You had coupons, and so you would make a pledge, and then each week or each month you would turn in your coupon with your pledge money. People didn't write checks back then; they didn't have a credit card, so you had cash, and you clipped it, to your or put it in an envelope with your coupons, so they know who to credit, for the gold bond. So. As I mentioned, this is the rendering that the architect proposed for the church. Two uneven Gothic towers. It had a rose window here in the middle. Had a single entrance here in the center. It had a separate wing over here to the right with arches in between. The actual church turned out very similar. I think that it's a lot taller, more elegant now, and instead of the rose windows, we have these lancet stained glass windows in this location. Now, there were several different elevations of the church proposed by the architect. Now, this is the exact same floor plan, but with a different architectural style, sort of a mission style, if you will, instead of the Gothic revival. But you can see this is the sanctuary, this is the connecting, and then this is where Wesley Hall is, and this is where the chapel is now. But this is that. But instead of having the two uneven towers in the front, there's a single tower in the back, sort of where the courtyard is now, where the stone pulpit is. It would be there. But anyway, but First Methodist preferred the Gothic revival, so the architect went ahead and used it on another church, University Christian Church, if you will. So, as I said, Wiley Clarkson did a lot of, he was the architect of record for this church. And here, there's University Christian. Yeah, that's the elevation. He used it later. So he did a lot of very notable buildings. The Sinclair Building is a wonderful building downtown. A lot of schools. These are just a sampling. The Masonic Temple. Of the top 25 architectural buildings in Fort Worth, Wiley Clarkson did 3 of them. You know, so he did more than Philip Johnson or any other notable architect. So. The groundbreaking for the current facility happened on October the 29th, 1929. We do have a few photographs of the actual groundbreaking ceremony. Sid Johnson from the foundation was in here earlier. He mentioned this is Mr. Baker, one of the founders of the church, there at the groundbreaking ceremony. This is the minister and then the superintendent. There were speeches by the bishop at the time there at the groundbreaking ceremony. But what is important about October the 29th, 1929? That's exactly right. That's the day that the stock market crashed. And so it was a very big commitment on the part of the church to go ahead with the construction, because not only the groundbreaking, but a lot of people had lost their fortunes. Some prominent people in the church had, but they went ahead with the construction just as originally planned. Actually, that's what I'm told, is that University Christian went with the more simplified architecture because it was not as expensive. So during the time that after the groundbreaking ceremony, we actually united with another church, St. Paul Methodist Church. St. Paul is St. Paul ME Church North. It was Methodist Episcopal Church North. It was located very close, just a block away from us. Originally, it was at Taylor 9th, and then they moved across the park after this building burned. They moved across the park and built a building here at 10th and Burnett. So this is Burnett Park. We're the 7th and Taylor Church is just this way a block or two. And St. Paul ME, they had a real good history. I mean, they had a 75-year history and some very notable people in the church. But during the period of time after their church building burned, while they were building this one in the 20s, actually, we had some joint services at that time at their old site, because it's where the electric building is now. It's where the old church site is. But St. Paul Methodist and First ME North and South basically united in 1930. And so that was 9 years before the national unification of the Methodist Church. As I said, the Methodist Church split in 1844, and it was many, many years after the Civil War that the church got back together in 1939.
I'm just so surprised that there were Methodist Episcopal churches north in the south. I just assumed they just split by geographic.
Well, it did at some point, and that's what I mentioned with Anthony Bewley, that when ministers came down at that time during the height of the racial conflict and everything, that was a difference. But no, there was a mixing. Just like you have different portions of the Baptist church. Now, there's a lot of Baptist churches in the South that are not Southern Baptist. So but yeah, it is interesting. So so it's good. But I think that it was good that Fort Worth emerged before the rest of the denomination. So here's Burnett Park, and this is where First Methodist Episcopal Church South was. You can see the dome and the two towers here, and then right across the park, just a couple of blocks away, that's where St. Paul Methodist Episcopal Church North was in 1930 at the time of our merger. So at that time, the bank building was not built here. Actually, their previous location was here where the electric building is now. So you can see other churches. There were several churches along Taylor Street here. The Methodist, First Christian, I believe that's the Presbyterian Church, and then also First Baptist was along Taylor Street during this era. So, and just to put everything in perspective, of course, okay, here's the courthouse back here with the river and the power plant, but the first church building at 4th and Jones was back over here. Now, during this period of time, even though we built a new church here and stayed here for about 20 years, they still had the building over here at 4th and Jones. A lot of the church offices were still over in the other building, and so some of the church business and records were kept over here, and worship services were held here. At this time, there were, as the congregation grew, some Sunday school classes met in the adjoining office buildings and things. So there was a real need to enlarge the campus. But as I mentioned, they were concerned about skyscrapers, encroaching into the building. Well, that doesn't look too bad, though, does it? Well, this is 1930. So we're going to move about 7 blocks to the west to get out of downtown, if you will. So, but this is an aerial photograph taken the following year in 1931. There's the church. That area is now an office building. So you can see we really were being surrounded, and so the move was good. The cornerstone for the current building was set. Actually, there are 2 cornerstones. There's the original cornerstone. This is the cornerstone from 7th and Taylor, and then the new cornerstone for this church. Running short on time, but a lot of symbolism in the church architecture. The 2 towers, the duality of Christ, both human and divine, ended up with 3 doors for representing the Trinity instead of the single doorway. The 12 tablets here representing the 12 disciples. Each of the marble is from a different quarry from all over the world. Again, a lot of symbolism both inside and outside the sanctuary. In the fall of 1930 was the walkover. There's a wonderful story about having the last church service there at 7th and Taylor and having the locking ceremony, locking the doors. And as they're getting ready to leave and walk over as a congregation, they hear somebody knocking from inside the church, and they opened the door, and it was the custodian that had taken care of the church all the time it had been there. He said, "I want to be the last one in here." And so he came out and joined the congregation. They all walked over together. But when they walked over, again, this whole building was built in a year. Isn't that amazing? They built the church in a year. Now, the towers are still under construction. You can see the scaffolding here. But there were boarding houses across the street where the parking lot is now, school over in the background, elementary school, if you will. Because, again, we moved out of downtown. We moved into a residential area. We wanted to be in the community. These are houses. These are people that could walk to church. The elementary school, John Peter Smith School, was right across the street. Boarding houses here. So it was a neighborhood church. So initially, when we moved over here, the worship services were held in Wesley Hall while the sanctuary was being built because the chapel was not completed yet either. So worship services were held in Wesley Hall. As I said, Wesley Hall is about the same size as the original church building. Here's a wonderful photograph, a Valentine dance. A heart-shaped table, hearts hanging from the chandeliers, a beautiful wooden floor, but you can see the stage up here, everybody's saying boy, girl, it was very nice. Yeah. So, but, look at that, crystal and silverware, very, very formal. The courtyard was actually built as an outdoor worship facility. That's the reason for the stone pulpit out there. The stone pulpit is still there, but the landscaping was not there. Actually, they put up folding chairs out in the courtyard, and in the spring and summertime, they would actually have outdoor worship services there, weather permitting. You can see there's a junction boxes on the wall where they had outdoor fans to move the air around. In fact, they had fans all over the church because guess what? 1930, no air conditioning. It wasn't until the late 40s, early 50s that air conditioning was added here in the church. So obviously this was not in the summertime with the stoles and everything, but a couple of Sunday school classes that picture taken there. Actually, this is Dr. Eugene Hawk, the minister at the time, posing with the Sunday school class, men's Bible class, up there. The sanctuary dedication happened a few months later in 1931. At that time, the sanctuary had been completed, about 7 or 8 months after, actually about 9 months after the walkover. So, but you can see there's no landscaping around the building at that time. Of course, some of you may remember the red carpet in the sanctuary before we put in the slate floor a few years ago. Again, a lot of symbolism, throughout the church and the woodwork and everything. And I can talk an hour about the symbolism just in the sanctuary, actually. Dr. J.N.R. Score was minister here from 1934 to 1942. This is actually a building that the church acquired. It was a home. Actually, in the 50s, it was a scout hut for the scout troop that met here as well. But you can see that there's a couple of hotels here behind the church, office building over here, and so you still have the auto repair around the church. So in the 1940s, Reverend Warren Johnson was the senior pastor. He was really noted for his fundraising, actually, and they brought him here to help retire the note on this $1 million facility. And so actually the church was supposed to be paid off over a 30-year period. They paid it off in 15 years in 1945 and retired the debt, and so more money could go towards missions and other uses as well. So, God, I wish I had that little sport car there. Don't you love those? Yeah. So, this is a photograph. We think it's some of the founding families taken out in the parking lot. Again, it's a dirt parking lot, dirt and gravel parking lot. You can see people were head-in parking along Fifth. Didn't need valet parking, just parked in front of the church and walked in. So no handicap parking either. So as my wife and I were growing up, Dr. Foote was the senior pastor here for 20 years. He was the longest serving pastor here. I actually don't remember Dr. Foote like this. This is more the way I remember Dr. Foote, with gray hair. He wrote a weekly column for the Star Telegram called Footnotes that was spiritual advice. And he was really very, very central to the community. If there was a question that came, a religious question or a social question, the Star Telegram came to him to answer it, or if there was questions about current affairs, they'd go to Dr. Foote. Actually, I remember, he was very much of a pacifist. He was not a big supporter of the war in Vietnam, actually, at that time. So, but while Dr. Foote was here, Epworth Hall was built. It's now called the Justin Building, after a remodel a few years ago. But in 1955, it was built as a youth building. The main entrance to Epworth Hall was over on the north side, facing Fifth Street. This is just a little side entrance. The main entrance was done with the remodeling of the Justin Building, but the ground floor had the jamboree room, had pool tables that you could play, and there was the gym, the skating rink, and there actually was a 3-lane bowling alley on the ground floor of the Justin building. Now, the bowling alley didn't have pin setters, so either you had to trade out with your friend to be down and set the pins, or pay a neighborhood, child, a nickel to set pins for you, But it was a youth building, so. During this period of time, also the courtyard was remodeled. The landscaping was put in. This little tree here is now a huge tree out there in the courtyard, but with landscaping and art was added in '56, so it wasn't so hot and sterile there. Another facility that was added in 1960 was Lyle Lodge. Have people been to Lyle Lodge? Are you all familiar with Lyle Lodge? Okay. It's a wonderful facility. While Barry Bailey was here, the pool was added and the pavilion was done. A lot of youth activities out there, the boys and girls dorms. It was named after Judge Lyle that helped negotiate the lease of the land out there from the water board. Here are a few pictures of the Lyle Lodge back in the 60s, actually. Naughty wood paneling and everything. I don't know if I have time for November 22nd, 1963 was, yes, that's the day that JFK spent the night here at the Texas Hotel. This is his speech out in front of the Texas Hotel that morning. Have a wonderful memory that Lamar Smith penned talking about this day. Of course, later that day, JFK and Governor McConnell went over in the motorcade over in Dallas. So instead of taking time to read it today, I'll just sort of paraphrase it a little bit. But let me see. Let me just go ahead and read it. It's short. This is Lamar Smith. I assume you all heard him last week. Governor and Mrs. John Connolly and their children were members of our church on that heartbreaking Friday, November the 22nd, 1963. The next morning, as usual, I drove to the church to complete plans for Sunday morning. A strange sense of confusion and despair had settled over Fort Worth after yesterday's tragic events in Dallas. A group of people, mostly non-members, were milling around the steps of the sanctuary. They looked dazed and lost. One after another, they came to the church doors and found them locked. As quickly as possible, I went inside and unlocked the doors so that they could enter. I telephoned Robert Clark, our organist, and told him of the scene at the church and asked him if he could come play the organ and play some quiet, comforting music. Of course he would. He came quickly and began playing immediately. I proceeded to the church offices to visit our senior minister, Dr. Gaston Foote. We have some church members at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, I said. He said, who? I said, well, Governor and Mrs. Connolly. Dr. Foote was up from his chair. Let's go see him. The hospital had cleared a ward of all but one bed. That bed had been placed in the middle of the room. With his wounded leg hoisted up by the appropriate hospital levers and pulleys, the governor was there. His life was still in a very serious degree of danger. Mrs. Connolly recognized Dr. Foote and me and instructed the security guards to let us enter. He had, still in some measure of shock and bewilderment, she embraced us, invited us to speak to the governor. He heard us enter the room and turned his head to see us, but he was still suffering some degree of shock. Earlier, there was a report that the governor, like President Kennedy, had died from the wounds. The report was obviously wrong. Governor Connolly's handsome face broke into a faint smile as we neared the bed. You fellows must pray for me and for the nation, he said. And we did. We held hands with the governor and Mrs. Connolly and offered our prayers for his recovery and the prayers for the president's family. Mrs. Connolly squeezed our hands in gratitude, and the governor blinked a thank you and closed his eyes. Dr. Foote and I slipped from the room, walked past the trauma room where the president had been pronounced dead, and returned to Dr. Foote's red Buick Wildcat. If memory serves me, there was not a word spoken between us as we drove back to Fort Worth and the church to join the mourners in the sanctuary. Mr. Clark was still playing the organ. In 1964, the First Methodist Church Foundation was established. It was the idea that came back from a business managers conference. And John Brelsford, who was our business manager, came back with this idea of a separate foundation to support the church. That was 50 years ago. As I mentioned, Sid Johnson is organizing the 50th anniversary of the founding of the foundation. The foundation is key because the money that goes in the foundation maintains the church campus, it maintains the buildings. It helps support a lot of the different ministries of the church so that your church pledge goes towards things that are happening today. You know, the missions, the church staff, the programs that are happening now, and don't have to go to the maintenance of this building. I just threw this in. This is 1964 confirmation class that my wife and I were in. There's my lovely wife over there. Yeah, so, in fact, who's that guy in the back? Yeah, that's Lamar Smith. He was an associate minister here when I was growing up, you know, and so it's good to have him back. In fact, he was the first director of the full-time director of the foundation. The reader organ was installed in 1965. It was the largest organ west of the Mississippi, but that was also 50 years ago now. So the organ has served the congregation very well, and of course over the last couple of years we've been in the process of restoring and expanding the organ. So hopefully you've been donating towards that to be an organ donor. Dan Garland with Garland Pipe Organ Company has been working hard. It's a 160 rank organ pipe, over 7,200 pipes overall. Some of the pipes are over 32 feet tall, some are smaller than a pencil, and we'll be having the dedication ceremony and some various concerts in the fall, probably in October for after the final tuning and voicing of the organ is completed. So originally the church spires were at the end of Florence Street, so it was sort of the terminus of that view, but in 1968 we acquired some of the other properties around that and created this nice parking lot area with a big green cross. Actually, Dr. Foote's the one that designed that. He wanted, as people flew into Fort Worth or flew over Fort Worth, to see the big green cross to let people know that this was a Christian community. At that point, in 1968, is when the unification of the Methodist Church happened, and so that's when we became FUMC, First United Methodist Church. 9-block area, which is now the current campus. This is actually the campus in 1979. Church Library, Cope Cottage, some of the other buildings that were on the campus at that time have changed. This is just a quick, I didn't mention at the beginning, but you might detect my background is architecture and city planning, so I sort of enjoy getting into all the specifics. But we've closed the Florence Street in front, then we closed Florence Street on the side. We've added the different blocks for the mission area. And so it's really key. We're one of the largest landowners in downtown Fort Worth, besides Tarrant County, the Basses. But Walter Underwood was senior pastor here for only 3 years. He later became a bishop in the Methodist Church. But what I remember Walter for is bringing the television ministry to the church. The television ministry started in 1975. Actually, in 1974, Walter went to Channel 11 and said, "Why are you broadcasting Dr. Criswell at First Baptist in Dallas? You're a Fort Worth television station," Channel 11 was. So we've got people at the church that will donate their time and effort, and we'll provide everything if you'll let us broadcast on your TV station. So then he came back to the congregation and said, "Channel 11 wants us to broadcast if we'll provide all the equipment and all the volunteers." So we've been doing that for the last 40 years. Dr. Barry Bailey came from First Methodist in Richardson, and the church grew dramatically while he was here. He grew from 7,000 to up to 11,000 during his ministry here. At that time, due to the television ministry, we had a lot of people. We'd get letters from all over the country because we were on the satellite at that time, and we get letters, saying that they had watched our service, but people would watch the service and then come and join us here in the sanctuary. So during that period of time, we were one of the largest. We had the largest audience on Sunday morning. So let me run through this real quick and try and wrap up here. Sorry. After Barry Bailey, Dr. Wayne Day was here from 1995 to 2003, and we saw some other changes in the church, going back to very more basic Bible teaching. During this period of time, we started the church website. We started doing cable TV for the television ministry. We started live broadcasting on the internet in 2003, so you could access it 24/7. 2011 we added Facebook, and 2012 Twitter and YouTube, so we have our own YouTube channel. This last year we updated the website. Hopefully it's a lot more user-friendly. It's a dynamic website that you can look at on your tablet or smartphones. There's a number of different things, additions to the website. There's at least a daily blog. Several of the ministers do a blog. There's additional information that you can access 24/7. We've done a new branding program, hopefully these are just some of the brands for some of the different areas of the church. So I want to mention Charles Gaby. His last Sunday was just a couple of weeks ago. He came here in 2002. I worked with him on roundtable worship in 2002, 2003. That eventually became the 11:11 service, and has been a great alternative service at our church. He also headed up the Center for Creative Transformation. Now with Charles leaving, Reverend Tom McDermott is the lead minister in the 11:11 worship, and Brad Thompson is head of the music portion of the service as well. I'm sure that's going to continue to flourish and grow, but we're going to miss Charles. So it's interesting, when Tim Brewster came here just a year after Charles did, Tim brought us an old VHS tape and said, "Can you convert this to a digital deal?" It was VHS tape of his wedding, and of course Tim had hair then, and Charles Gaby was playing the guitar. He had shoulder-length hair, playing at Tim and Susan Brewster's wedding. It's interesting. But anyway, if you don't know, Dr. Brewster's also a pilot. He was actually flying the plane when this photograph was taken. So pleased, he just recently celebrated 10 years here at the church, and so a lot of new things happening at the church. When I think about the church, I think that I think about all the mission things that we do. We do so many different things. As I mentioned before, during World War I, we reached out to Camp Bowie. We helped start the Presbyterian Night Shelter. We helped start we have the room at the inn. They're having training for that very soon. Mission trips, have youth mission trips, adult mission trips, Costa Rica, Kenya, Habitat for Humanity. We usually participate in that once or twice a year. There are just so many programs that you can become involved in, and encourage you to do that. So another exciting thing that's happening at the church now is Children First. Children First originally was in the chapel. It moved to Wesley Hall, and now it's in the sanctuary the first Sunday of each month. Of course, Mr. Mark is the catalyst of that. It's always exciting. If you haven't been to the Children's First service, please go. But it's an exciting thing. We do a live broadcast of the Children's First. It's also on our YouTube channel, and you can watch it 24/7 at a later date, as well as the 11:11, which is also done live streaming, as well as the sanctuary service. Another exciting thing happening right now is the First Seventh. Reverend Lance Marshall has been here almost a year now. There's been several initial worship services, a couple at Britt. The last one this last week was over in the Justin building, but reaching out to the non-churchgoers, particularly in the West 7th area. So that's a very exciting ministry. And I think that's a lot of what I'd like to leave you with today, is that, just this last fall we dedicated the historic marker here in October. But that's just a history. I mean, that's what I've tried to cover a little bit with you today. But 160 years of history is just the beginning. I mean, you and me, we all are part of the future of the church, and so we're making history now. And so let's see where we go from here. So we want to look towards the future while remembering the past. If you want to know more about the church history, the church archives are located on the second floor next to the library, and welcome you to come down there. I have another handout if you're interested. This is an ABC poster I put together a few years ago for my daughter. She's a school teacher, and so these are different images taken around First Methodist. And if you have to use your imagination a little bit, but there's A and B, C, D, and so anyway, that's another program. The ABCs of First Methodist Church, but you're welcome to a mini poster if you'd like one. Any questions or so?
Did you go through and find all of these?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So actually, I've got answer sheets over here that tells you where they are. Well, yeah. That's in fact when I talk to the congregation class about the confirmation class, I give the kids a copy of them, and they can use it as a seek and find kind of thing, and then I give the parents the answer so that when the kids come to them, say, "Oh yeah, it's right over here," But anyway, so any questions or so? Okay. Well, let me close this with a word of prayer real quick. Father, we thank you for this time to celebrate the heritage of First Methodist Church, and we look forward to the great things you have in store for us individually and the church as an arm of your ministry here on earth. We thank you for the mothers that are here today, and we thank you for the many blessings that you bestow on us and our families. In your son's name, we pray. Amen.